Brzezinski model, the technocrat model, is much more interested in the incremental, slow kill, Fabian approach to bringing technocracy into being. So they're not going to send Homeland Security troops to round you up and put you in a FEMA camp. They'd much rather promote everybody being enmeshed in video games, the Disney gulag, the virtual reality gulag, all this kind of stuff is a much better FEMA camp in your home. They don't need the FEMA camp. It's too messy. It's a big ordeal. And so all the nonsense of all the patriot crap on the radio, that's not going to happen. They don't need to. The shadow global government is already here. And as we said, it's in the latter stages of the mopping up process to move it into the next phase, i.e. between two ages of the next age.
What's up? Welcome. Can you hear me? We ain't got no sound on you.
How about now?
We do
Good?
now.
Hey.
I can hear you now, yes.
What's going on, dude?
Not much, man. How are you?
You know, pandemic.
I feel like I haven't talked to you in a while, so I'm glad you're back. It's good to talk to you.
Yeah, no, it's always good. I feel like I need one of these one-on-one with you, like every 2 months or something. How you been doing?
I can go one-on-one. I can beat you in horse. I can beat you in one-on-one. I can beat you in any game, dog.
Wait till I get my backdrop.
Uh-oh. You're going to have one of those green screens with
comic books.
With 1993 Windows screensavers in the background. That'd be sweet.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The crowd, the mob, the mindless mob of nerds that are also a high IQ at the same time. What's up? Can y'all hear me? Everybody good? Are we good? Scamdemic. Jenga. Playing Jenga with Alex Jones. Eating oysters. What's up? I'm just waiting for the nerds to tell me that the sound is good, and then we start talking. Start jawing. You know how it is. Chat's always a little bit behind.
Yeah, this is like that weird on when talk shows were a thing, where the guests would be on and they just wouldn't talk to each other until the commercial came back.
I go on radio shows still, and it's like that, and it's weird when that happens. They're like, all right, you'll be back in 5 minutes, and then you just have to sit there listening to the radio, and then some weird ad for...
They just don't want to miss a good sound bite, I think.
Yeah, makes sense. That's a good point. I didn't even think about that. All right, everybody says the sound is good. Hopefully more nerds will roll in here. 150, yeah, we'll get some nerds in here. Everybody's off doing homework because they're nerds. Well, hopefully we're going to have a good show tonight because Jimbob has been asking me some fire questions in my inbox. He was blowing me up. He's blowing me up in a good way, not in a mean way, not in a terrorist way. Philosophy, terrorism, blowing me up, asking pretty good questions. And actually, a lot of the questions that Jimbob asked are questions that a lot of people kind of ask Jimbob wasn't asking dumb questions. I'm saying that he was asking them in an intelligent way. But a lot of people take the questions that we were chatting about the last couple of weeks and they run off in a dumb way. And they come up with dumb ideas, dumb worldviews, and ridiculous positions. So we're going to hit on some of those. As you can tell from the clickbaity retitle that I gave this stream, You see these videos about glitches in the matrix. You see videos about simulation theory and all kinds of stuff. But also a lot of the philosophical questions that Jimbob brought up are more high-minded, that are very relevant, like the one in the many. What is that? Why does that matter? The law of identity, all these kinds of things. But before we do that, let's, Jimbob, introduce yourself, because we've had a lot of new people.
Okay.
I think last time you were here, we were at 50,000. So we're almost at 60. So we got almost 10,000 new. So tell everybody about you and then what's up.
All right. My name is Jimbob. I'm a satirical cartoonist. I'm a weekly contributor to the Washington Examiner and author of Savage Memes Volume 1 and Volume 2, which features a Karunka time capsule. I'm glad that Karunka happened because it gave me a delayed production time, and it was enabled me to include a lot of ridiculousness that we all shared in the last couple of months. So yeah, I'm back to theism after 15-year hedonistic, atheistic, relativist stunt in LA, and very new to philosophy and logic, like properly, just really getting into it, and I just absolutely love it. And Jay, you've been a big influence on me in that regard.
Hey man, I'm honored. You are a stellar comedian, a stellar wit. I mean, the memes that you put out, I'm envious of the skill that you have in memery. I wish I was as good as you at putting all that stuff out. So you're using your logic in the right way in terms of affecting the culture. So yes, the last few times we talked, last time we were just clowning around on the 50K stream, but now we want to talk about maybe stuff that's a little more serious. And I think the previous two streams that you and I did, they were fairly serious. We talked about, Darwinism, panspermia, these kind of stupid ideas, materialism, metaphysics. Where do you want to start? I think the first thing that you had brought up was something like the simulation theory, or no, multiverse. Which one? Where do you want to start with, and we can launch off into that?
I guess we can start there. I mean, multiverse, simulation theory, why use of logic, contrasts or conflicts with the theory itself, and why it's a problem. I just got into certain, not full debates, just like, banter back and forth. And that came up, and it seemed pretty clear to me. But I also ask you these things to get to the real root philosophically and logically, to see if I'm on track so far as discerning why it doesn't work well, like why it doesn't work at all. And so, as you said, I think you believe, I don't know if that was the question you said, it violates the law of identity. Was that question? Was that the case?
Yeah. So, and let me remind the audience too that if you see the link that I put up multiple times, so obviously we don't have super chats here anymore directly on my channel, but if you do want to ask us questions in super chat, you do it through Streamlabs. So there's the Streamlabs link, and that'll all be should come up on the screen. That little gay running dude should pop up if you want to see that bunch of nonsense. Jennifer, what's up, Jennifer? She donated. Sometimes it works. There we go. She sent $20. There we go. So we'll get to those super chats here in a minute. And of course, you can ask a question there. You don't have to just donate. You can type in your question or whatnot. But shout out to Jennifer for that $20. So yeah, that's a good place to start. Let's start with okay. So simulation theory. Everybody's talking about, or was it multiverse? I've already forgotten what we did.
It was simulation.
Okay.
And actually, I'll just start with also, I just posted that on my Instagram account that was going to be one of the things we're discussing. And someone said, they were like, simulation theory is real. And I said, no, it's not. And then he said, that's something a simulation would say. And I said, you wouldn't know what a simulation would say unless you knew you were standing outside of it. Yeah, exactly. And I think that really gets to the crux of it, is that, at least from my perspective, just using very basic reasoning, is that you'd always have to appeal outside of it, like a lot of things, like, right. How would you know? How would you know you were outside of it? How do you know the simulation isn't 3 simulations or 1,000? And so that's just very basic level starting point for me, where I'm like, it's just endless regress in a way.
Yeah, the easiest way to refute this one, and this is a common one that you see kind of, we live in the matrix. If you go to Philosophy 101, dudes ask this question. If you think about this, we'll break out the whiteboard here. So let's take this proposition: reality is illusory, right? So it's a universal claim. It's a claim about all states of affairs. Everything is an illusion. We all live in the matrix. These are what are called universal claims, universal statements. And whenever you put an every or an all in front of something, that's called a universal quantifier in logic. And that is a really strong, vast claim. It's a claim that, there's a lot of weight behind this. This is not like saying, I think, I think Paul McCartney might be, a clone, right? I think Jennifer Garner was in the CIA, right? These are really strong claims because they are about a universal state of affairs. So if we think about reality is illusory, the easiest, you've hit on it, you've said it right, the easiest way to refute this kind of basic level mistake is to just point out that if that's the case, we're going to do a reductio, right? Reductio ad absurdum. That is one of the strongest ways to refute things, is to reduce the position to absurdity. Reductio ad absurdum. So the position reduces to pure absurdity. It's self-contradictory at a fundamental level. And so we're going to say that this proposition is a reductio ad absurdum. Why is that the case? Well, the easiest way to show that is to just point out that if all of reality is illusory, then this truth came to you via your experience of reality. So this truth proposition is also part of the illusion and therefore self-refuting. It's that easy. Right. So at a fundamental level, it just breaks down to nonsense. And so this is a metaphysical nonsense claim. And likewise, it also relates to epistemology because it says reality is, so it's predicating a state of affairs to something in the world. So it's epistemology as well. We're not directly dealing with ethics, but you could flesh out ethical implications from this.
Right. And then, the simulation could just as easily be called a metaverse in a way. It's just these kind of wider terms. I was having a conversation with someone who was actually a theist and then returned back to, resting on atheism now. And I was confronting him about logic and how it's not justified under his worldview. And then he went into the kind of the Dillahunty and many others go down this route where they start questioning whether logic is even absolute. There could be a universe where it doesn't exist, doesn't apply the same way, as well as mathematics and other absolutes that we use today to discern and apprehend truth and reality. And I thought about that, and because I'm visual, I explained to him that if you draw a circle, and the circle is our universe, what we know, how we get to know those things, logic, reasoning, and you're able to actually locate this other universe that doesn't operate the same way, you wouldn't be able to actually locate it, isolate it, unless it then suddenly was pulled inside that first circle I just said. So in other words, you'd have to appeal to logic and reasoning and all of the laws we know to even discern another universe that doesn't operate the same way. But by default, you're pulling that universe into our existence. You know what I mean? And that was a way that visually kind of refuted him, because he couldn't have an answer, because the only way to get an answer is to assume what we've been given, logic and reasoning. And you just can't. The only way they could be right about a multiverse is if you could never know it exists at all. Mm-hmm. That's the only way it could exist. But you could never get to it because you're pulling it into our paradigm. And so that kind of made sense to me. And I was like, oh, that was a pretty easy way to kind of just keep that theory in its place, like in the here and now. Because a lot of times those arguments and theories go down to the basement where people are smoking bongs, and they just go, they never take a strict logical ridicule approach to it. And then, because that would be over, and then the party would be over, and then be like, why are you ruining my high, dude?
Exactly right. Let's break this down. This is an easy way. This is a good way to go about this, is to just look at this ridiculous phrase and claim, and we'll notice how easy it is to debunk this. So let's take the proposition, reality is illusion. Reality. Okay. This is what exactly, right? The phrase assumes already some kind of metaphysics, some kind of statement of existence, that things are out there, they have being, or even if you think that everything is just a manifestation of your mind, or maybe everything is a manifestation of my butt, right? Could all of reality just be why does it have to be my mind? Why is mind higher than butt on the scale of reality, right? On the scale, the totem pole of being. Maybe butts are higher on the totem pole of being, and everything's just upside down, and we don't realize it yet. But we don't know because we're just assuming, right? We're starting with something that we think is an easy place to ground and start everything. Oh, reality. We all know what reality is. Really? Do we? I mean, philosophers have been debating reality for millennia. Do we all have a common sense idea of what reality is? I don't think we do, because what reality is going to be... it's going to be determined by our worldview as a whole, right? That's why if you're a rank materialist, you have a different worldview from a person who's a theist, right? Matter, reality is different. You think it's two different things. And by the way, if there's a multiverse, then there actually is a whole dimension that's just butt. Right?
Yeah, multi-butt.
There's literally everything. There's a whole fart dimension, right?
Yeah.
Literally the whole dimension is farts. There's also a dimension where it's just me and a fart. There's also a dimension of me, you, and a fart, and a butt. On ad infinitum. And then let's look at is. Is a statement of predication in terms of, sentences. It's also a statement of being here. So ironically, what the people who say this kind of stuff, they don't realize that this is more than just a sentence. It's also making a sentence about a state of affairs or a state of being. It's assuming, again, that something exists, even if you think that it's just your mind. It's still saying that something has this feature, has this property. It is, right? And then when we come to the question, the statement illusion, the problem with this is that in our common understanding, if we were to use that in like a colloquial sense of illusion, I mean, you could debate what illusions are, but in the colloquial sense, if you're going to try to convey meaning with this sentence, most people think of illusion as contrasted to the real, right? Well, now wait a minute. Reality is contrasted to the real. That makes no sense, you see.
Right.
So, once again, we see that at a fundamental level, this not only assumes so many things that it hasn't justified, it's really just nonsense speak. It's just gibberish, right? And beyond this, we could also deconstruct this on a grammar or a philosophy of language level, right? We're looking at the statement as it is here in terms of assuming that it actually is telling us something true about some world or some existence or some state of affairs. We could also deconstruct this at a linguistic sentence level, right? Because this is some guy in your philosophy class who just watched The Matrix and smoked some, DMT, right? He thinks reality is illusion. Wait a minute, bro. If you're going to make a meaningful statement like that, let's boil this down and do you realize that you're assuming that words have meaning? That's actually a prior assumption to the actual statement of metaphysics in the sentence, you see. So he's assuming that the R and the E and the A and the L and the subject, the predicate, right? That these are meaningful things in sentences, you see.
Right.
Anyway.
If he was going to be really consistent with his worldview, he would just say like, bit that.
Yeah, exactly. He would just fart.
And then he would just basically defend it.
Yeah. I mean, even Kant, I think, made a joke about this, that a lot of this kind of stuff is just farting upwards, meaning from your mouth. Right.
And then you see how the farting upwards is just rampant in all aspects of culture and life. And it's just borrowed, the same ridiculous self-refuting stuff. One of the things that usually pisses me off when people get on Joe Rogan. That's why I'm hoping you eventually get on there, because you could actually combat or use logic and reasoning in a philosophical way to put a lot of things just at a halt. You just can't run away with these things, and there's a lot of runaway conversations there.
Yeah.
And when Dawkins was like teaching little children that they're going to burn in hell is absolutely immoral.
It's absolutely immoral. But of course, it's okay to eat the children. There's nothing wrong with eating children. There's nothing wrong with touching the butts and eating children.
And then I'm just like, Joe is, wherever he is, he's not present to just be like, wait, you believe in a universe that's just not basically non-existent, just material matter, infinite, void of nothingness, pitiless. And then how could why you're using the word moral? It's insane to me. It's absolutely insane. And but they get away with it. And it's just the one thing that gets me mad. It's not that they do it. It's that there's no one there to just be like, wait. Hold on a second.
Right. I think, don't forget that there's quite a wide concatenation of ridiculous worldviews that have appeared. I mean, Ben Goertzel was on, we're all just a bunch of molecules in different formations, man, and it's all just chaos and meaningless. There's nothing more than molecules in motion, man. Literally what he says, right, which is total incoherence. But another thing I wanted to point out about simulation theory itself is that, and I have read some stuff on this. I've looked at different people's analyses, and when it first was kind of getting popular around 2013, 14. I mean, I know it's existed prior to that, but you started seeing people talk about it online. I heard Joe Rogan mention it back then, and other people that would be featured at like TED Talks and this kind of stuff, right? And one of the things that they proposed was there's a study. Some university somewhere did a study, Dutch or something, I don't know, about how they studied how light, moves in space or something like that. And it has this sort of phased array or something to it, to where it has actual kind of like structure to it. So light has a structure to it. Therefore, if all of reality is kind of known via light, there must be some kind of like structure. And they said the structure was similar to the way computers have, bits or whatever, like, O's and ones and O's and ones and O's and ones, right? So they were making this analogy. Oh, look, see, the binary aspect of computers is very similar to the structure of how light diffuses or something like this. This was the argument in this paper, right? Anyway, point being, the way that I interpret that data is going to be determined by kind of my, again, governing assumptions. And so as a theist, for example, I might just as well assume that the universe was created to have these features that are similar between the way bytes and binary work in a computer and the way we experience the natural tactile world, right? So there's nothing about the natural tactile world having this sort of ordered structure to it that negates that it was a creator. Similarly, RNA, DNA, there's nothing about that doesn't demonstrate that there was a creator of the animals or humans or life, biological life, right? So in other words, I can have the same data put in front of me. This in philosophy, it's called the underdetermination of data. Simply having data is not necessarily going to give you the correct interpretation of that data. This is, again, it's a well-known, notorious problem in the history of epistemology. And anyone who studies philosophy of science knows about this. So I can just invoke the underdetermination of data to point out that sim theory itself does not actually tell you how the universe was constructed, if it was constructed. But what do all those people say? Aliens, dude. We're in like aliens, the matrix that the aliens put together, man. Like, what? I thought a creator was irrational, by the way. Oh, but not if it's aliens, you see.
Yeah, similarly, dude, there's infinite amount of universes and there's an infinite amount of possible universes where we exist. And you're like, well, is it possible that one of those universes has a creator, a god? No, dude, that's crazy, man. Oh, man, you're just ruining my high, man.
You're right.
Yeah.
So I was trying to think of it. There was We had a few streams with Father Deacon Ananias where and I actually mentioned this one to Stefan. This was one of the problems of epistemology, that what happens is that you get a theory or you get a discovery, and it sounds, and I mean, it could be true. I don't know. There's also obviously fakery in science as well. But let's assume that the study is correct and you get, light has this property. How do you know that light having that property, that's not going to tell you anything one way or the other about the grand structure of reality as a whole, per se, right? Or the origin of cosmology, right, or the origin of man, right? Just like when you look at an earthworm and when you study biology, it doesn't tell you about what happened millions of years ago, supposedly, when this supposedly just popped into existence. So there's all these leaps. That's the point here, is that underdetermination of data is calling out the non sequitur leaps that the science, quote unquote, community often does unknowingly or without any reflection, or, whoa, look, there's similarity between monkey and chimp, or excuse me, between man and monkey, right? What is it? 95, 98% similarity. Therefore, it must all be the same common ancestor.
Right.
Why can't God create, right, two different species with similar DNA? You see, so in other words, it's really just depending on the presupposition is the point.
Right. There seems to be there's the is ought fallacy, or more technically the naturalistic fallacy, like its cousin or whatever. It seems to be an ought is ought, and then there's like an is was fallacy. Like you look at what is, and then you just assume what was, similarly to assuming what ought. And it's all just assuming based on nothing. Like, like bird, people think certain things have the same ancestors because they have the same functions in their biology, like wings. And you're just like, no, they have the same functions because they provide the same advantage to that thing. It doesn't mean they're connected just because they're, you know what I mean? So yeah, that speaking of the presupposition, I was in a debate with someone, I think his account name was Debate Me. And we talked about, logic, and I confronted him on all that. And then this is another question I asked you, is that when you confront someone and they can't justify logic, but they presuppose it, and they say, well, you're just presupposing God. And then you get into, whatever, Gödel's incompleteness, and you justify circularity. Is it just a standstill always? Like, is there any other move when you both establish that you're both presupposing? Because I was under the impression from his statements that you don't need to justify a presupposition. Like, ideally you move to and you want to, but you can just leave it there and that's it. And I was like, maybe I'm not studied enough to, take him on that, because I just couldn't get past it. I was just like, I guess we're at a standstill. If you're just going to presuppose logic without justifying it, and I'm presupposing God to justify logic, then we're both presupposing something. I just ended with it. My presupposition makes logic coherent, makes meaning coherent, makes all these other things coherent. Yours is just kind of left in the open. And that was the best I can do.
Great question. This actually comes up a lot, especially in our Discord. We get this one a lot. One thing I wanted to mention was Ernst Haeckel. He's another great example of this fallacy of like similarity and, oh, that looks kind of like this, therefore common origin, right? Everybody knows that. Hopefully you know now that this famous he was basically the Darwin's evangelist to Europe, is what he's known by, Ernst Haeckel. And he was exposed as a huge fraud because he actually just made up the drawings of the zygotes. So he actually doctored the zygotes to make them all look the same, to say, oh, look, the zygote of, this reptile is the same as a human and they look the same. And actually they don't look the same. But So he lied, first of all, but even the similarities that they have, right? This has actually been debunked. Nobody believes in ontology anymore. It's just a thing he made up, totally debunked, discarded, and it was all based on his made up drawings. So, I mean, and that's not one, there's many examples amongst the history of the Darwinists that are full of fraud, right? Piltdown man, all that stuff. But on the question of coherence, the other thing I was going to say is that you can think about like a penny too. Like if I find a penny and it has Abraham Lincoln's image stamped onto it, I wouldn't therefore conclude that pennies and Abraham Lincoln come from the same ancestor, you see, right? But that's how silly this morphology is between the assumptions of the tree of life, basically, within the Darwinian scheme.
Yeah, it's funny the scribbles you mentioned, because that's like it reminds me of like just like the idea that you can scribble anything and it looks like a mad genius, like, journal, like you look at like
right.
old scribblings from like, Jordan Peterson, where you just like it, and then there's a dragon, and then this has meaning because, there's another snake up there and they're fighting, and people are just drawn into the childlike wonder that they once had.
The snake is long, 7 miles. The West is the best.
Exactly.
Chicken style. Right, like just Jim Morrison's just...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just saying stuff.
Ejaculations of nonsense.
He's like, that's how I'm going to get them. I'm just going to make a maps of meaning out of doodles, and then I'll sell out stadiums.
Okay, so back to your good question. What happens when people say, well, if you have presuppositions and I have presuppositions, then we're at a standstill because we all have presuppositions and we just chose different ones? Actually, we did not choose different ones. So we're both choosing presuppositions, you could say. I mean, some of them we're forced to. We don't necessarily choose them, although you could choose theoretically bad presuppositions, I guess. But for people who are not intentionally being incoherent, we all kind of are forced to some similar presuppositions or approaches to things in the world. And this is why, for one, you don't actually have to refute every worldview. This is another common question that people ask. It's like, well, how do you know that there's not a worldview out there that you haven't heard yet that doesn't actually have a coherent answer to the questions that you bring up? Well, that's because when we look at philosophy and the three disciplines of philosophy, right? Epistemology, ethics, metaphysics, there's actually a limited number of places that you can go in each of those, you see. So there's not actually an infinite number of variations of worldviews. There's actually a very few. There's actually a very few number of places that you can go within each domain. So, for example, in metaphysics, right, I could ask basic questions like we started this show off with, like, how do we know reality isn't just an illusion, right? So we're asking a question about metaphysics that we're actually limited in how many places we could go, right? We could say it's either illusory or in some sense it's real or not illusory, right? There's two options there. Well, once we say that it's real, we're again limiting the number of commitments and places that we can go in the next step. When we say, well, is all reality matter, or is it also matter in something else, right? If all reality is matter, then we're reduced again back to contradictory, fundamental presuppositional mistakes. So we can't go with pure materialism. And the same will go with ethics, right? You have to have, there's a limited number of steps. And if you say ethics, all ethics is relative or it's not relative, right? Either or is here. If all ethics is relative, then there's, again, nothing ethical and everything is just subjective taste. That's self-refuting. So we know that there are objective truths or ethics in some sense. Therefore, we move in that. So there's, again, limited numbers of ways that each of the branches can even go. So there's actually not an infinite number of worldviews. Now, there's variations down the line in terms of worldviews with crazy stuff like, I believe the Jim Jones worldview that the universe is literally a fart. That's what he said, by the way. That's actually the Jim Jones. That's Jim Jones apologetics. That fits in well with our original drawing that we had, the fart universe. But even in the Jim Jones worldview, that was that was something that he proposed kind of down the line, right? So there was all these other things that, like, he believed in. You had to do this. You have to do. There's objective truth, and it's whatever Jim Jones says. This kind of stuff, right? So again, even if it's the craziest cult, there's still a basic fundamental structure and pattern to that system or that worldview. And that's going to be the case for anybody. Every human being is limited in the number of places that they can go in their worldview. So when we're engaging with a guy who says, well, whatever, dude, like, you have your presupposition of God and that's a circle. I have my presupposition of, what did he say, logic? And that's a circle?
Yeah, he just presupposes logic.
Our presupposition of God is the presupposition of logic. So in our system, we kind of have, if you think of it as a web, right, we'll say the web, we'll put God here in the middle. We'll put all of the other things that extend out of the presupposition on the web of beliefs here. If I draw a web real quick. So we've got, we'll say at the center of the web, just for the sake of analogy here, we'll say God. And then we've got things out here like we've got logic, we've got ethics, we've got, belief in things like mathematics, the external world, love, right? I mean, you could put anything out here that are part of your web of beliefs. Okay.
Right.
Now, in this structure, what we're looking at is that this system will be coherent, not just because we are saying that God is at the center of it, right? We're not saying, it's true because God and God says it's true. What we're saying is that all of this coheres in a sensible way as an entire system. And by the way, that doesn't mean that we know everything about the system, because actually no system can tell you everything about the system, right? So let's say that we'll use M here, right? We'll put M at different places in the system for mystery, right? There are aspects of reality which are mysterious. We might make discoveries, learn new facts, and that becomes no longer a mystery. But there's always some aspect of mystery within any system. That doesn't mean that the system as a whole is incoherent, because we could have a system where mystery is actually a component in the system. It may not be everything, but it can be a component. And by the way, guess what? That's a feature of everybody's worldview. Everybody's worldview, because of human limitations, necessarily has some degree of paradox, limitation, finitude, and mystery. It's impossible. So that's actually a little game that atheists will play. Oftentimes they'll try to say, well, if you can't explain every single thing to me right here, right now, bro, I don't have to believe your worldview. Oh, really? Well, then I don't also have to believe your worldview, because nobody can do that. That's an irrational, impossible requirement. So what we're looking for is again, coherence. Does coherence have assumptions? Absolutely it does. But again, what we're arguing is that it's a thing that's unavoidable, right? It's kind of like those other basic things that metaphysics or ethics, once we deny those, the whole thing falls apart. If we deny coherence, which I guess theoretically you could say, well, I don't believe in coherence. Well, then you just refuted your own sentence, because sentences require different levels of coherence within language, lexicons, definitions, sentence grammar, right? All of those things require coherence. So let's look at, so that's our system. They may not like it, you may not like it, but that's how it kind of holds and stands and fits together. But the other system is going to be different. It's going to have, if we want to put it as the same model, we'll put Dude Bro here at the center of it. And he's got a web of beliefs that he has, but his web of beliefs are just there, dude. Like, there's no rational coherence that links logic, so-called, to anything else or to him. He might try to say that there's a link between those things, but he can't actually explain how the two link or relate together at all. For example, things like causation. Let's take a simple thing like causality or ethics or love or logic. All right, so let's say this looks like a giant cookie with a dude in the middle. That's a cookie you get at the mall, those nasty mall cookies that are huge. This is a worldview size cookie from the mall, dude. So here's Dude Bro in the middle. He's got, I believe in logic, dude. Well, I believe in there's some kind of ethics, bro. Oh, I believe in cause and effect, dude. Oh, I believe in numbers. There's like numbers or whatever. Oh, I believe in love, dude. Love wins, man. Right? So you've got Dude Bro and just these things he says. Okay? Right. This is his world. So what we're doing here, we're not just saying that God, therefore true. We're saying, let's compare this worldview to this one. This one, again, we may not like it, but we're not here to pick out which ones we like. That has nothing to do with, I mean, there's a lot of things we don't like, but that doesn't mean that they're not true or they're not facts, right? But this one doesn't even get off the ground, because let's say that there is causation. How does this dude have any connection to or know what causation is in the external world? How does he know there's an external world? How does he know who Dude Bro is? Is Dude Bro even a self? We don't even know this yet. What is a self? Where does it come from? Right? Is there a connection between love and ethics, or between love and logic, or between causation and math? We don't know, right? But it's just assumed, it's just stated to be the case. It's all ad hoc. And what you will notice is that constantly these guys will just refer to, it just is, bro. The whole system will constantly be ad hoc at every level. And that's why you have to constantly call them out on all these different assertions, right? Because it's like, well, just give me this, and my world works. No, I'm not giving you any of those things, because all those things that you want me to give you actually only make sense in this worldview.
Right. And even how you drew it, the logical end is solipsism, which is accurate to the drawing. But I also noticed that, not that this is an argument for it being true, but you could take his circle and anyone's circle who looks like that and put it in the upper one, and it would make sense.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
But you can't put us, Jay or Jimbob, in his circle and it makes sense. You know what I mean?
Right. And
we
that's
can't
why,
be placed
that's why
in
the
that.
presuppositional argument is saying that that bottom circle is just a copy paste ripoff of the top circle, and it's trying to get rid of the centerpiece of that circle, put himself in there in the God position, right? Dude Bro is the God, right?
Right. That's why I always, when I argue, I don't skip right to God. I feel like it's a necessary step to get to a mind, to connect.
Yeah, you can go that way in terms of the progression.
It's a longer move, I guess you would say, but it's like people they just can't refute that concepts and laws and truth, knowledge, reasoning, logic, math, these things that we can get an atheist to say, no, we didn't invent these. I admit we didn't invent these. Some will say we did invent them. Some say it's in our genetics, man. It's just, and I'm like, where is truth found in biology? Like, show me truth. Like, show me the concept, truth. Show me morality in your body, you know. But once they admit that they're concepts and that they're absolute concepts, they at least, I mean, if they're open, can get to a mind. At least they will go to aliens. They will go to, it's AI mind, maybe. Then it's like, fine, go there, but don't stay where you're at. Don't stay in that really super incoherent place without even trying to travel toward coherency or truth, because that's just the worst place to be. In my view, I feel like that's hell. That's like should have been one of Dante's like layers, is where just like nothing is true. You can't know anything. I mean, that's almost like what we could only imagine like dementia is.
I was going to say something like dementia or madness. Exactly.
Yeah.
Is hellacious. Exactly. Hellacious, fallacious, boy.
Yeah.
There was another way I wanted to kind of present. So the tag approach, what we're saying with the transcendental argument is we're saying that we're not just saying that there's only circular arguments. We're saying, I know you're not saying this, but what I'm saying to Dude Bro there, when we say that arguments are ultimately circular, that just means at a certain level in our systems, it's unavoidable. That's all it means, right? And that's true for everybody. So if that's true for everybody, the next question that arises is, well, how do we reconcile which systems are real or coherent or meaningful and which ones aren't? That's where the comparison of the systems comes in. So the only way to do it, because we're not dealing with things that we can compare or test in a lab, right? Belief systems are not empirical realities. They might encompass empirical realities, but they're not reducible to empirical realities. So how do we test them? The only way to do it is what I was showing you, is to compare the two models. And if one of those models is fundamentally retardo, then it's not true.
Right.
Because that guy is trying to set forth a system that's not retardo, that is better or refutes our system, right? And that's what you have to understand, is that arguing at a systems level is not exactly the same as arguing at a kind of normative, factual level. And this is why this is so difficult for people in the science sphere, is that they're not used to thinking at a meta level, right? So
which is bizarre, because they're borrowing models, kind of coherency theory, to make material claims. They're like taking those things and they're like, well, we can just draw a couple circles and then just that makes sense out there in the universe. And it's like, well, that, that's a tricky thing too, where you're borrowing. I mean, I don't know if they're aware that they're doing it, but they are.
I mean, I met like countless, PhDs in my many years of college and grad school that, I mean, that part of the reason for that is the specialization. The guy who studies astronomy, he doesn't know anything about logic at all. Like he might know one thing or something, but he doesn't know.
You mean Degrassi, you mean?
Any of them. I'm saying, like, forget the big pop famous ones. Like, if you were to go to your average university and you were to go and sit down and interview the, biology professor, the, astronomy professor, you would find them constantly making basic level fallacies. They don't know anything about this stuff.
Yeah.
And that partly because the education system is intentionally compartmentalized. That's part of it, right? I mean, you can get a PhD in biology and never have a logic class.
Yeah.
So they don't know what you're talking about. They have no idea why this even, they just think this is like they view it like science fiction, like you're just making up stuff. That's
right.
What they think.
Metaphysics, they, like you once said, they purposely put the books next to
in the Barnes and Noble,
like
it's
with the crystal head dress and
how to use your menstrual cycle, witch magic, that's what they think metaphysics is.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I had a roommate once in LA that put her menstrual cycle in my garden without asking.
I wasn't joking. I mean, you will find books like that in the Barnes and Noble. By the way, what's up? We got almost 400 nerds in the house tonight. Welcome, everybody. This is Dyer, Jay's Analysis, and we're interviewing Made by Jimbob. I've got his link below if you want to check out his savage ass memes. And it was word salad. Yeah, thank you. Exactly. It's always just word salad, bro. Yeah, but it's not word salad when Darwinists make up all this nonsense like ontogeny, right? That's a totally made-up word from Ernst Haeckel by his made-up diary where he's making up nonsense doodles. Oh, but that's science, you see, but not what we're talking about. So, so circular arguments are unavoidable, but sometimes you do have to kind of like wade through the dirt or the weeds to get people to, like you said, kind of think about basic concepts. I agree with you that in practice, in terms of what's more advantageous out in the field, so to speak, is not to necessarily immediately jump to like really highfalutin theology concepts. You kind of have to start with more basic philosophy things that people don't even realize they recognize, like you said, like mind. And there's nothing wrong with in the argumentation in terms of the logical order, starting with something like mind or starting with something like causation or metaphysics or numbers. You can start with all those things in your logical order, but that doesn't mean that they have necessarily metaphysical priority. That's a different issue. That's the problem with classical so-called apologetics or classical argumentation and Thomas Aquinas, is that those positions assume because of a logical priority that therefore there must be some sort of metaphysical priority. But that's a different issue. But that's why you don't see me make the causal argument like, everything has a cause, therefore there was a first cause, therefore it was God, the God of the Bible. Totally fallacious argument, terrible argument. But I will say that I can make a transcendental version of a causal argument. I can say, dude, you can't reason or do anything in the world or have any meaningful experience of the world without causation. That's two different arguments. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have to, I mean, people generally don't wake up, eat their processed cereal and think about like the unity between immaterial concepts, the mind and the physical world. They just like are like, oh, how lucky we just got really lucky here that there's immaterial in this great explosion or from a singular moment in time. Also just the laws of logic and number theory and reasoning and that entire unified system of three, just we just got lucky with that. And it just blows my mind. But it makes sense that people aren't thinking of that and they don't have to deal with it. I think you were saying, like, what was it? Since the Enlightenment peeps, they kind of like were like, we don't need to deal with that anymore. We're so past that. Like, we're so like, just follow Q, and they just don't have to deal with justifying the things that are you just take them as freebies. People just take them. They don't want to think about them. Sometimes I don't blame them, because sometimes you're just like, is this just like, it's not a lost cause for me, but explaining it or prompting people or like stopping people in their tracks with their thinking. It's like, are they going to ever spend more than 15 minutes just dealing with that and what that means? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's it's like fishing, right? The analogy that Jesus uses of throwing the net out and you'll catch some, but you won't catch them all. And, there's no telling, we don't know who will be and won't be caught in the net. But, I think a lot of times people have a hard time believing that academia, because, they're big gray buildings and they have big statues of, dudes out there, and it just looks so impressive and it's so authoritative, and universities produce like computers and shit, right? So they must be knowing what they're doing. They don't realize the how hollow and shallow and absurd academia actually is. And if you've been in that world, you know it. You've seen it firsthand. You know how fake it is. I mean, I think we're starting to see these other areas of like Hollywood, and government. People are starting to see how fake and absurd it really is. And guess what, y'all? It's not that different in academia, okay? Because if you're writing your thesis, for example, right? I mean, in a lot of, unless you're in like a hard science discipline, like maybe engineering or math or something like that, I don't even know. But most of the time, you're trying to write something that will get you acclaim and get you notoriety for a novel thesis, right? Like that Shakespeare was actually a woman, this kind of thing, right? That's the kind of thing that people are trying to, groundbreak with their research and with their philosophy. Or if you're in the philosophy department, you just kind of have this assumption that, like you said, Jimbob, those kinds of questions are the old ones. We don't do that anymore. It's like fads. It's like, well, that's not in fashion anymore. We don't do that, which is absurd, because I thought this was the domain of free thought, right? I thought universities promote free thought. But it's actually the most dogmatic, like atheist materialist place imaginable.
Yeah. Well, it's also just like, how are they going to get their funding if they're stopped in their tracks with like logic and philosophical barriers that just debunk and expose the nonsense? It's like they
don't care about funding, Jimbob. They're altruistic and they want the truth, and that's why we need the state to step in so that private entities don't control education. And if it's the state running things, then it'll be objective and truthful, right?
Fair. Yeah, totally.
I mean, what if the state is owned by private institutions? But anyway, that's just retarded. But yeah, I mean, let's look next at before we do multiverse, because that one will be fun. But let's look at one in many, because this is a question that you raised, and it's maybe a little abstract for some people, but if we do, not you, but in the audience, if we do grasp it, this is actually a really fascinating realm of philosophy in terms of classic questions, right? So in the history of philosophy in the West, especially, but even beyond the West, you have kind of recurring problems that pop up that are always being argued and debated. And when we go back to Plato and Aristotle, and even prior to Plato with the pre-Socratics, they start asking this question of what is one thing versus the class of things, right? We have a cat and then we have many cats. Well, what is it that they share in common that makes them cats, catness, right? This kind of stuff. And the pre-Socratics asked that prior to Plato, and they tried to solve this big question with universal claims about reality, about metaphysics. And so some guys would say, oh, everything's fire, right? all is fire, right? And that might sound a little absurd, but you could see, like, if you thought that energy, right, fire is energy, and everything seems to have kind of some kind of energy making it be or move. So everything must have some kind of like fireness in some varying degree. Or everything is water, right? Things come out of water, right? When humans are born, water breaks. So maybe everything's just water in different ways. Or everything is little atoms. So the ancient Greeks came up with these theories, and they were trying to explain what everything is with these all-encompassing grand narratives of everything is this. Now, when you get to Plato and Aristotle, they kind of modify it and they take it to the next level. And they said, no, it's not, everything's not like, one thing. Although Plato kind of said everything is one thing. He said everything's idea, right? Not idea in the sense of, I had a good thought today, but like ideas themselves have a higher level of existence than the material plane. That's the Platonic view. But the reason Plato thought this, and this will help everybody understand, this is like the 7 coconuts dilemma that we had in the discussion, right? What is it that makes something one thing or one class of things and not that whole class? What picks out a single thing, a singular, particular, as opposed to the universal? So this is the question of universals and particulars, the one and the many. And in the history of Western philosophy, this is a dialectic. It's usually a tension between these two, between groups and classes and particulars, individuals. But the easiest way to understand why this question kept being raised is through grammar itself. I'll give you props to Dr. Branson, who just did a interview with our friend Lewis, and they went into the history of the one and the many in terms of grammar. And a lot of the ancient Greek grammarians were looking at language and saying, well, in order to explain and talk about the world, language itself just has this feature of saying cat, so we're picking out a specific cat amongst the class of beings that we give the title cat, and we're saying the cat is on the mat, we'll say here. And so cat picks out one of some class of beings that all possess the same features. And in the ancient mind and the medieval mind, the essence of a cat, or the essence of that thing, is more than just the properties. There's actually some kind of higher level quality that makes that cat a cat, beyond just the external, what Aristotle would call accidental quality. So just having hair, just having 2 eyes, just having 4 legs and a tail, and eating mice, and being Garfield or whatever. Those are not the features that are the essence. Those are just the characteristics or properties of what it is to be a cat. So you can begin to see how we're reasoning, and we're asking this question. We're saying, what is it that's the universal here that's also instantiated in a particular cat, right? Because we're saying that this particular cat is on the mat. It has a spatio-temporal location. But at the same time, it participates in some higher level reality of catness, right? That would be, both Plato and Aristotle would agree that there is some substance or essence that this being possesses. And even when we write a sentence, guess what? Our sentence is assuming that to be the case. So the Greeks would have said sentences presuppose metaphysics, right? These things must actually be the case in the world for our words, our logos, to have meaning. For logos to work, to have meaningful expression in dialogos, in dialogue, this metaphysic must be the case in the world out there. So this is the question. This is one manifestation of the question of one and many throughout history. Universals and particulars. Aristotle will call this primary and secondary substance, right? Primary substance is the particulars that's picked out, secondary substance being the universal quality that it's shared in. Now, Aristotle doesn't believe with Plato that the substances are ultimately ideas. He thinks that they're actually in the particular objects. So that cat possesses the universal essence of cat just as much as the next cat possesses the universal essence. And what distinguishes them is their particular characteristics of that particular cat, you see. So, that's a lot of rambling, but I'm just trying to say that, look, language itself is asking, one in many questions, right? Is asking universal particular level questions. That's what the ancients were obsessed with, and that's why you could see why they would like mathematics. I mean, mathematics is a really easy way to ask that same kind of question, and that's why all sentences can be translated into logical formulations or even mathematic formulations. Like you can put sentences into formal logic or into even mathematical equations if you wanted to. You just make you just make the words stand for numbers.
Right? Didn't Kurt Gödel do that? He said this. What did he say? This sentence can't be proven, or this.
Well, he was illustrating. Yeah, he was illustrating the circularity of sets by just showing a paradoxical Gödel sentence, which even some of the ancient Greeks asked that same kind of question. They didn't think about it as to the depth that Gödel did.
Yeah,
and all Gödel did was just look at mathematics and point out that sets and set theory have a circular self-referencing. If you're going to explain all reality with set theory, it's not going to work, he said to Bertrand Russell, because the sets ultimately appeal outside of themselves, and so you can't have any perfect system that's coherent that doesn't appeal outside of itself in mathematics. So that's a transcendental type of argument in math. And what we're doing in the transcendental argument for God is just taking that type of argument and we're applying it not just to transcendentals and transcendental categories, but to God himself as kind of the ultimate transcendental. So it's the same form of argument used in different arenas, so to speak.
Is Bertrand Russell's set, what was it, his paradox, is that related to the one and the many? Do you know the one?
Not directly.
The barber
so Russell, he mentioned multiple logical paradoxes, and typically he was just pointing out that they're like inescapable features of language. But Russell still thought that you could have a perfect mathematical set that explained reality. He thought you could, in a reductionist way, reduce all reality to symbolic mathematical representations, and you could explain all reality that way. Now, what Gödel was showing is that actually you can't, because the set becomes self-referencing, or it also references outside of itself, which is illogical in that strict way. And so therefore he's just showing that you can't do a reductionist approach to reality. Any reductionist system will have that feature. And so Bertrand Russell, being a classical minded empiricist, he could not admit that there were either circular arguments or that a set had to appeal outside of itself, right? So once he did admit that, he kind of, it doesn't work in his basic presuppositions. So it means you can't consistently be a total empiricist. It's impossible.
So when people come up, it'll never end, this theory of everything constantly just rehashed and represented in new ways. Isn't that mathematical problem that Gödel exposes? Isn't that just crushing to anyone who's trying to propose a mathematical or physical, not metaphysical, quantum physics, all that stuff to reduce all of everything to a singular theory mode or whatever? It doesn't the Gödel's work just go like, well, no, you can't, because you have to peel outside, so there's a good essay
there's a good essay that shows, for example, why it's Minds, Machines, Gödel, and it argues that you'll never have self-conscious AI because AI is just algorithms, right? So the argument that Gödel is proposing also applies to AI, that paper argues, because AI will never evolve to have consciousness because you can't reduce consciousness to something material. So the argument assumes that consciousness is material, right? Oh, our consciousness is just, matter in motion or whatever. And if we figured out the matter in motion and we put it into a computer, then we have consciousness. But that begs the question, and it just assumes that consciousness is matter. But it's not. And that essay argues that what Gödel showed proved that AI will never be self-conscious. It's absurd. It's stupid. It's just science fiction LARPing. But to be clear, though, I mean, not everybody who might think, reality is math or just matter in motion, or can be reduced to that, they wouldn't necessarily be physicalists. I mean, you might have somebody who thinks all reality is math in a Platonic way, or you could have a Neoplatonist who thought that all reality is reducible to higher level logic or thinking. But that is also self-refuting too. I mean, it's a kind of a different way of arguing. A lot of times people who recognize the problems in materialism and rank materialism and rank naive empiricism, they'll kind of opt for Platonism or Neoplatonism, because it does allow for there to be higher level orders of reality, an ideal realm, a psychosphere, to use the Matthew McConaughey language, psychosphere, the mindscape, the mental realm, which some of those thinkers like Roger Penrose actually think has a real existence. So there are still people, a lot of mathematicians kind of opt for a Neoplatonic or a modern version of Platonism.
Right.
If you read that book, which is really good actually, Paul Davies' book, Mind of God, he kind of argues that point. He's like, look, I don't know about exactly what the right theism is. He's like, but if we look at the way math works, the way Gödel's stuff works, if we look at the way higher level hypercube geometry works, these things are obviously not reducible to matter. Mandelbrot sets are not reducible to states of matter. Right. How can we explain that? And the best that the strict physicalist materialists can say is, well, one day we'll know, right? So they have this faith that one day Mr. Science, right, Mr. Lab Coat will just figure it out. Oh, now we know that all reality is just. But again, you'll never have a perfect physicalist explanation without assuming that everything is physical.
Yeah, and even if you expressed it like in the same problem with the cat or the seven coconuts, the concept of consciousness or AI is still not identical to whatever the expression or apparatus we create to represent it. You know what I mean? So that we have an idea and then we're like, I think we got it. We're going to mimic this thing. And all you're doing is mimicking some, constrained, apprehended version of it, like that. You're just like, oh, that's AI. And you'll never get the direct connection to consciousness because, again, you can't appeal outside and watch consciousness to know exactly what it is, to be able to then simulate or model it, because you're still in it. You can't, and that's kind of our thing, is that like we can't appeal outside ever.
Yeah.
I mean, can we? I mean, I don't.
Well,
what would we know that would look like?
Well, theoretically, you could if you had a mind that was outside of it that revealed it to you. So if you're a theist, you have the possibility of that. I'm not saying that it's true because you say that. I'm just saying that if the theistic worldview is true and the God of, the worldview that, for example, I have is correct, then you could see how it's possible because God could reveal from that outside perspective as to what universal claims or universal truths are grounded in. So if you have a universal mind, then yes, you do have a basis for that. And now, again, I'm saying that it's coherent, right? I'm not saying, because sometimes you'll get people say, oh, well, if you can't explain to me perfectly how it is the case that a universal mind makes claims about universals true, then I don't have to believe it. Well, but again, that's a requirement that no system can actually meet. What we're saying is that it is possible. It makes sense how you could make universal claims if your worldview has a universal being that is the grounding and basis for universals, you see. And that's precisely what we're getting at here, is that, so in philosophical theology, this is called divine conceptualism, right? That the grounding of reality is the divine, the concepts in the divine mind. For us, they're called the logi, Logoi, which are just the instantiations of the logos, right? So in that worldview, that's why we say those things. We're giving a why here. We're not explaining all the hows. That's not possible. But that's contrasted with, again, like, so remember, so if we were looking at divine conceptualism, the different forms of this, you could look at, this is not divine conceptualism. So any system that believes that the world is patterned on a creator God, would be a form of divine conceptualism. So Judaism would have a version of this, could have a version of this. Islam could have a version of this. Christianity has a version of this. And conceivably, I guess if you believed in like the many aliens or many God creator simulation, I suppose you could come up with theoretically the AI entities had a conception of what they would create. Okay. I mean, I don't believe that. I think you could refute that in another way. We'll get to that when we look at like simulation or multiverse theory, but just to some of the ideas of, everything is math, right? This is so Pythagoras, Plato, and Max Tegmark, in terms of modern mathematicians and theoreticians, he has this view that reality quite literally is mathematics at a fundamental level, right? So some of the people who believe the quantum stuff will say, when I get down to the smallest levels of reality, again, I don't know if they're correct, but let's say that it is. If it is true, they'll say you find geometric structure even at that smallest level of reality. So therefore, reality is at a fundamental level math or numbers or geometry in some way. And that's just another, binary, right? 1 and 0, being, non-being. All right, that's another version of like mathematical approaches to reality. But again, those are reductionist, right? They're still systems or positions that try to predicate from a limited human vantage point what all of reality is. So you actually hit on kind of one of the key areas where I would criticize this is that I would just simply say, look, how can you say what all reality is if you're a human? You can't. I mean, you're limited. And again, most people, unless they're Platonists, which most people aren't, 99% of the people that you interact with are going to be basic level empiricists. They're going to be like, man, we only know what we can see, touch, sense, and feel, man. That's all we know, dude. Well, guess what? If that's all you know, you can never make a universal claim ever at all. It's impossible.
Yeah, including that claim. You couldn't actually show me how that's true.
Correct.
Using those tools. Yeah, it doesn't work. It's funny, a lot of people, I'll do streams or, talk to strict empiricists and materialists. And it's funny because our best approach to that worldview is, it almost sounds like nihilism at first. Like we're taking the nihilistic approach to like lead them to their logical end. Have you noticed that? Like you don't just say like, no, like it's this. You go, oh, okay. You just keep like, if that's true, then then you believe this, and then like that's I don't even consider it a technique, because I'm literally like asking them. I'm just going, how do you know anything's true? And then they're like, you're just being a nihilist, and I'm like, no, I'm leading toward the logical end of your worldview, and once you lead someone there. It's just like you did with Dillahunty. Like eventually the only thing you can do is appeal to metaverse, logic isn't real, maybe somewhere, like, it's just real for us now, and that's just absurdity. So, I mean, it all, like you said, there's not many places you can go. And I'm seeing that clearer and clearer. Like there really isn't that many places to go with a worldview, because one, like you said, we're limited, but that's like, sounds like a, nihilistic approach. But it's not. It's just, that's the truth of the matter. And we have to appeal outside of ourselves. So we're stuck, but no matter your worldview, you're stuck with those two facts.
Yeah. I think you also nailed it when you said that earlier, when we were talking about Dude Bro's worldview, that it was, it ends in solipsism. And ironically, the history of Western philosophy actually went in that direction. So Descartes, when he does his meditations, he's actually trying to get down to the most basic thing that can't be doubted, right, with the cogito. And then he proposes what he thinks would be a place to kind of start building a philosophy. Oh, we all know and can't doubt this. Now, that doesn't work, and for multiple reasons. But what's ironic is that even after that, when we get up into modern empiricism, which is still the dominant kind of philosophy for the most part, naive empiricism, because people just think, well, there's what else can we do? There's no other options. We're boxed in here. You look at Quine's essay, his famous essay just reasserts the problems of Hume. That's where we're stuck. And ironically, if you look at Russell, for example, in his scientism books, he actually proposes in Scientific Outlook that reality it really is just a series of phenomena that could entirely just be projected onto our senses from who knows what. I mean, he doesn't believe in simulation theory, but he literally says early on in the book that, look, we don't know that the data or the impressions that are hitting our five senses, that they're actually coherent or meaningful. We don't even know that they're from an external world. Like, we could be a mind in a vat. He literally says that. He says we could just be projecting them from our subconscious. He says, because we can't answer those questions, we're just going to proceed as if we live in a world where we're distinct beings and there's a commonly experienced external world and all these things, right? Because we can't answer just forget it, dude. It's done. It's like the unattainable quest. It's like, can you beat the final level of Donkey Kong? There isn't one, right? So you might think, well, are we at a nihilistic endpoint? Are we at a dead end? No, because you would only think that's a dead end if you want to be an atheist, if you want to shut up all of reality into man's mind. But that's where all of the, you see these people, the problem is not knowledge for them. The problem is pride. The problem is atheistic arrogance, pride, and not wanting there to be a God. They have an invested interest in not wanting there to be a God. That's the issue here. It's not, it's just a lack of facts, and if we just give them more facts. No, you have to repent, you see. That's the point here. And again, yes, there's limited ways that you can go.
Also, I would say more specifically, people don't want there to be a coherent God, because it's way easier to, you notice it's not just a fad. I was thinking about this, like, why is Christianity such a strong target? Islam is a target for a lot of things, in media or whatever, politics. But I was thinking about why certain worldviews are really hard targets, and they're just like out in the open. And I was realizing that, like, it's coherency. It's like, if something makes sense, then if you're invested in not having that be the truth, you're going to find the one that's the most threatening. In other words, like, if you're over the target, like any of you guys, like Roosh got, banned, right? He was over the target, so to speak. He was saying things over a target. And I look at it similarly. So it's not like just, because a lot of other things are easy to write off, like an elephant with 6 arms and blah, 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 or Kali, the demon goddess, and, multiple gods flying around and kind of arguing with each other in paganism. It's like, it's easy to discard a lot of stuff, but because specifically Christianity unifies an immaterial God, and that God is embodied in a man, I believe that is why it's so, people are so averse, because it kind of like gets into the material a little bit, into the material world. Yeah. And it's a lot more threatening, I think, and I'm not well-versed enough in theology, just still reading and learning, but it seems from a broad perspective that that's the threat. If it's coherent, it's a threat. If it's not and just silly and can be written off, it's just like, okay, not a threat.
That's a great question. Let's get to why that is also unavoidable for any system. How truth in whatever senses you conceive it to be have to instantiate or be in this world as well. That's actually unavoidable for their systems too. So even the guys who argue against or have this problem with the idea that the universal could be instantiated in the particular or could enter into the here and the now, that's going to be a big problem for any worldview. And by the way, this is a big problem for Plato. But this is another reason why you can't go the Platonic route. But I did want to address that question just kind of in a earlier about being limited in the ways that we can go in terms of our beliefs. if we just took basic ideas in epistemology, right? Anybody's epistemology will have to answer kind of easy questions, right? We got two options here. Can we know or we can't know, right? We can know or we can't know. Truths, propositions, beliefs, anything. Doesn't matter what.
Those are both number one, though, right? In the end, if we can't know,
right? So if we went this route, it would be right. It would be self-refuting. But I'm just going to show you that.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Right. So we know that's the one we covered earlier, and we know that one's self-refuting. So we're going to cross that out. So the next step, I meant to make this number one. So we know that number one is correct. I can't write upside down. There we go. So we found out that one was correct, and if one was correct, that could lead to other questions. Can we know there's an external world? Right? Can we know who's that we there? Can we know what an I is, a self, an am? Can we know what it is to exist in this external world? Can we know what a world is? Can we know where it came from? So we just start. So what I'm getting at is that once you answer yes to one of the easy kind of foundational questions, it limits you in where you go from there. And if you answer wrong in one of those foundational ones, the whole system collapses. It's like, the superstructure of the building collapses, right?
Right. Is that still within the one and the many issue?
It could be. You could apply that to that.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just kind of making it even more simple than that. But if you wanted to, you could apply the one and the many and say, well, if you don't believe in universals, then you can't actually predicate of anything. And you'll get a lot of modern philosophers who will try to answer that and say, well, we don't actually believe that there have to be universals, but we will act like they exist in language so that we can have language, but that doesn't tell us that there's actually any universal truths. So they just play this game in philosophy and academia where they, just like the Darwinists, say, well, we don't actually know there's an external world. We can never actually know that. But look, dude, we're going to act like it is so that we can do our science. That's how stupid it is. I'm not kidding. That's what they do. And they'll just ask, if you start bringing these things up, they'll say, man, nobody can even answer those questions.
Yeah.
How do you know
nothing?
Can answer those
nothing's
questions?
really. Yeah. Nothing. No truth is accessible. But you had 1/6 of a wee for a million years.
Correct.
Yeah.
And many of the science crowd still has 1/6 of a wee for many years.
Yeah.
So what was your last question? You went to a different arena.
Where did I go? I was talking about the target. Easy target, like coherency, like not just. People don't. It's not just that they don't want to believe or confront the possibility of a God, but it filters down. It filters down to coherency. Like the closer you get to coherency, the more people don't want to deal with it. And they'll even go to people like Brett Weinstein will be like, I can't deny, and similar to Jordan Peterson, where they argue for the workability, the usefulness of religion, Christianity, as a heuristic, a model, what I like to call a Tekken avatar to use in the game of life. That's good. That one's good. I like that one. And they almost admit the pragmatic aspect of it, but the pragmatism isn't the basis for the argument, nor is usefulness, and that can't be further the basis of truth or morality or ethics or anything else. So they kind of they're swimming in the same soup. They're confronting and dealing with it, and I actually applaud some of them. I don't necessarily respect their ongoing departure from the truth or rejection of logic, but even someone like Sam Harris, who's just constantly contradicts himself all the time, still at least got to a place where he's like, well, no, I really think the good exists. Like I can't avoid it. And the same thing with Stefan, when you had your conversation, he was already at a point where it was like, I'm not going to pretend I don't live consistent with this, with the, acknowledgement of these metaphysical preconditions, these metaphysical claims, these truths that have to be true in order for me to even begin to argue about truth at all. And then, once you get to that place, I I think it's either you go toward good and God, or you live in a version of hell where you're just like,
Yeah, you begin hell in this life, absolutely.
yeah, and you're like, something's true.
So let's deal with that question that you raised. Like, well, what about the people that have a problem with the idea of like universal truth entering into the here and the now in this world, right? Because we do say that about Christ. We say Jesus is the Logos, the second person of the Godhead, that he became flesh, right? He became man, fully human, walking around, doing things that humans do, yet without sin in our worldview. Isn't that problematic? Aren't we kind of like diminishing truth by bringing it down into the here and the now? That is the Platonic issue. That is the Platonic problem. Now, remember, we said before, Plato was asking one of those great questions about the one and the many when he was saying, well, what is one cat in relationship to all cats? What do we mean when we talk about cats? And we said earlier that his solution in his mind, what he thought was the best answer, was idealism. And by idealism, we don't mean it in a colloquial sense like the Marxist on the street is an idealist. We mean it in a technical metaphysical sense, that what really exists or has a higher level of existence or reality are ideas. Plato is the preeminent idealist. He thinks that in his scheme, in the Greek chain of being, you could say, at the top of what exists in the chain are ideas. And those ideas ultimately actually are fundamentally one. This is the monad for Plato. So what exists, truly and properly speaking, is the one, the idea, the monad, and all those ideas, even the cat, right? We're saying that the essence of the cat is the idea of cat. That's in the monad, and ultimately it's one. Now, there's problems as to how there can be distinctions in the one, because there's not. But we're going to set that aside for a moment when we look at Plato. We just want to understand that this answer, and we're going to show why this is a problem for Plato. It's also going to be a problem for any of the persons who might admit abstract truth, but don't want it to enter into the here and the now, like we say with Jesus. We're going to point out that they have the same problem, and not only that, they actually admit that it does enter into the here and the now. And guess where it enters into the here and the now? In the non-Jesus believing worldview. In their mind. They make their mind the Logos. We'll see that in a minute. But what are the features in Plato's idea of the one or the higher level ideal reality? Well, for him, because it's like math, obviously it's unchanging. The number 7 doesn't become the number 5. It doesn't evolve. Those things are eternal. They're not subject to time like we see here. It's invariant. This realm doesn't undergo flux, right? Catness will always remain catness no matter how many cats come and go, even though all the cats in the world go to hell. I'm joking. They don't.
And also, just anyone in the chat who went there with their brain, that's still the same, even if we all decided that B is
Correct.
7, because it doesn't matter what you call the cat. That's just the descriptor.
Yeah, that's the linguistic
essence
token,
of whatever.
Correct.
Yeah,
that could change, right? So that's why, Plato would just say to that, well, look, I'm a Greek. I use this word for cat. The Chinese, they use this word for cat. The Egyptians use this word for cat. We're all talking about the same thing. The linguistic symbols can change. It doesn't matter because the referent is the same. That's all Plato would say to that. But yes, you're right. And then the features of this metaphysically, this ideal one, this monad, these ideas, they're metaphysically higher in some sense, meaning that they're more real or they're given ontological priority. And they're also immaterial in Plato's philosophy. So this is all, in his view, contrasted to the here and the now in a dialectical tension. Now you're starting to see why, if you think that math, numbers, logic, that stuff is more real and it's higher ontologically, metaphysically, it's given a priority. This world is lesser, lower, prison, dream. Oh, now it's starting to sound like Gnosticism. We've heard this before. So this world is a trap. It's a prison. We're in the Matrix again. And literally, Plato's philosophy is the Matrix philosophy. But forget that. Let's just point out this main thing. Look, Plato had this same issue because people say, wait a minute, Plato, if that's the real realm, how does that realm of the ideas and the real relate to this realm, which you say is not really real? It's like a dream. It's an illusion. Your whole system is built on the one and the many having a real participation and relating to one another. But if that realm is invariant and unchanging, and this realm is literally flux and change constantly, you've got a problem, Plato. How can you relate two fundamentally intentioned things? Do you know what Plato's response was? I mean, it's utterly retarded, but it's...
Did he say, it depends on what you mean?
You're close. He actually... Peterson might actually believe this. I don't know, but Plato literally said, we had a past life, bro.
Oh.
That was the best he could come. He said, the best I could come up with is, at one time we were in a past life in the realm of the ideas, and we were part of the realm of ideas. We were one with the one, and we at some point just kind of like fell down into this bodily prison. So he literally relies on myths. He says myths. That's ancient myths, and we are reincarnated. That's what he said. So transmigration of souls, total mythology. So you see, the irony here is that you thought, and in a way it is a highly rational, highly systematic, mathematical, Pythagorean system. And what does it ultimately fall back on? Mysticism. We just had a past life, bro, where we were the one, man. We were all one, dude. So even that system is based on absurd. Now, if you don't want to go this route, you see, let's say, well, I don't believe in that reincarnation nonsense. It doesn't matter, because you're going to have the same problem in your worldview if you don't have the ability to explain the invariant, abstract, conceptual things and entities relating to instantiating and being able to be in this realm of time and space and flux. Now, we can explain that in the Christian system. We can give an account for how that's possible. I'm not saying, by explain, I don't mean I give you the infinite, perfect way of how it all works. By explain, we mean give the possibilities and the preconditions as how that's possible.
Doesn't he also had a problem because he only even through his mythical explanation explained the unity between the immaterial, the one, the abstract world of the invariant, and the mind, and us, the mind. But he didn't, I don't know if he did or not, but in your summary, it didn't sound like he included the unchanging, like the what is it called? Regularity in nature. Like that we actually perceive in similar ways.
No, he wouldn't have a way to explain it. You're correct. I mean, that's a question that will be asked a lot later in philosophy. But you could ask that of a Plato or a Platonist or anybody who tried to go down that route. And I was just giving one easy example of the tension between the invariant and the variant of the. This is in philosophy. It's a problem of being and stasis, like flux and change versus stasis and invariance. These are problems that come up that these kinds of systems can't answer because they're bad systems. But yes, you're correct. You could ask that one. There's a whole list of problems that you could ask of Plato. A more fun, an even more devastating one could just simply be, well, Plato, if this is the case, why was there ever distinction at all? Because remember, the one, the monad here, right? So in the Platonic system, the highest level reality is the one, the monad. Quite literally, we're saying that numbers are a mystical thing, magical, mystical. Load up for the number mystery tour. The magical number mystery tour is coming to take you away. Reincarnation type stuff, right? Literal Beatles level stuff, right? If this monad was perfect and in a state of unchanging invariance and flux in the primal, pre-temporal, whatever, ideal, why was there ever this split into the dyad? You see, this one at some point split into the dyad. And this is Plato's view. This is the ancient mystic view, right? And this dyad then produced, you got it, a triad. And so this dyad that split, this caused nous. And this caused, the two of them together caused world soul. Now we're getting into the anima, the world soul. right? We're getting into this level. I mean, I'm not joking. This is the system. This is the ancient esoteric view. The monad split into the nous, mind, and then the monad and mind produce world soul. This is the Platonic triad. This has nothing to do with the biblical.
Sounds like a VH1 show.
But all we have to do is just look, Plato, bro, slow down here, dude. Like, why was there this split? Come on, what does that even mean? That the one split to nous? And he's getting this by reading like ancient mythology texts. He's taking mythology and he's saying, you know, dude, there's like secret coded messages in the, you know, in the ancient myths of, you know, Zeus and the split from, you know, Athena comes from Zeus. That's like telling us of the original schism in the golden age. I mean, that's what he's doing here. And do you know where he says he got all this? I'm not joking, by the way, if you don't know this. Do you know where he says he got all, I'm not kidding, where he says he got this?
Whatever the Snopes was back then.
Oh, no, it's even better. He says, I was taught by a guy who was taught by a guy, or because Plato was taught by Socrates. And Socrates was taught by a dude named Solon. And Solon went on this journey and he talked to the priests in Egypt. And the priests in Egypt told him the ancient mysteries. Literally, Platonism is an ancient mystery school philosophy. So it's a hermetic philosophy of ancient, so he claims. I mean, scholars have debated whether this is all BS. Anyway, point is that, look, you can't escape this mythology element, and I'm using mythology in a loose sense, not in the sense of it everything being fake, because you could say Christianity is a mythology or just a narrative. What I'm getting, so this is a narrative. So Plato, for all of his attempt at mathematizing everything, still has to rely on narrative, grand narrative explanation. Darwinism still has to rely on grand narrative stories. Even Aristotle, who was way more scientific and empirical than Plato, still relied on narrative grand stories of the first mover being love, man. Mm-hmm. The first mover was love, dude. So the point is just that none of these philosophies can ever escape narrative, story. I don't mean this in the Jordan Peterson sense. I'm just stating what's a fact.
Dragons.
Yeah.
Snakes.
So therefore, what we actually are doing when we compare worldviews is not just comparing. You're correct to say that we are comparing logical systems. We're also comparing narratives, because even the most rationalist, materialist guy. Let's take Bertrand Russell. Remember when we did Russell? He's probably the preeminent rationalist, materialist, empiricist. Loosely speaking, he's not rational, but you know what I mean, right? The preeminent logician, the greatest logician of the modern era, which is all bullshit, but let's just say that he is. He begins his book by saying, rational thinkers have forever been persecuted by religious dogmatists. And he lists the Hall of Science, the heroes of the Hall of Science. What's he doing here? Is he doing science? No, he's telling a story. And he's saying that the Galileo, Nicholas of Cusa, all of these different scientists are persecuted by these irrational dogmatists, the Puritans burning the witches. And then we come up to, now we are in the era of free thought and science and empiricism. He's telling a story. That's not empirical evidence. That's a story. Right.
I mean, what's his name? Hitchens, as charming and witty as he was, he'd always be like, no, how could the world mean anything? The Andromeda is coming, and great nothingness is going to hit you, and you realize you're doing the same thing.
Dude, have you watched Carl Sagan?
Making meaning.
Have you watched Carl Sagan?
Yeah.
He's like, billions, and we are all stardust. We're made of star stuff. Did you hear that stupid song that went viral? Remember that?
Yeah. The big.
We're made of stars. All right.
Yeah.
Lawrence Krauss, preeminent physicalist. Right? What does he say? We're made of stardust, man. And we're destined for the stars again. So they always throw in the transhumanist bullshit because it's just a story. They're telling you a story.
Yeah. I predict Lawrence Krauss will have a ponytail within 10 years.
We're made of star stuff. Let's see. Simulation. Let's talk, or not simulation. Multiverse.
Multiverse. Who did it come from? Was it the crunched over guy? The universe is 10,000 billion years. The multiverse.
Stephen Hawking. Yeah.
Yeah, Stephen Hawking.
Yes.
Is that
Remember
where
him?
it started?
Huh?
That's how he justified they found out
I'm trying to
there
remember
wasn't
what he
actually
said.
enough energy to create the Big Bang, so they were like, well, there's probably more universes.
Oh yeah, I heard something about this, but I don't
Let's just
remember.
make up more of them.
I don't remember the details. But actually, there is this weird. I'm not joking about this, by the way. There's a weird sex magic component to the Big Bang stuff.
Oh yeah,
it's actually evident in some of those people in their philosophy. But anyway, yeah, I know. So that's what I'm saying is that the reason we're all made of star stuff and stardust. That's Crowley. That's all from Crowley, literally. And Crowley was transhumanist. Like I don't know if he said the bots would take over, but he thought humans would eventually storm heaven. So that's what transhumanism actually is. But by the way, you can ask your questions via Streamlabs. That's the replacement for Superchats. I'll put the link there. We've got a lot of Superchats we're going to get to here in a minute. Thank you all for that. We got a lot of generous people tonight. Very, very thankful for all that.
Stephen Hawking marionette? Pretty much. People think maybe they was just
dude. Stephen Hawking's like a Dalek, dude. He's like Have you ever seen when they open up the things that the little garbage cans the Daleks are in? That's what they look like. Stephen Hawking. I bet you he was the model.
Oh, God.
And when he was on Epstein's Island, by the way, he was going up the hill on the little St. James Hill. Did you know his wheelchair tipped over?
Did it?
Yeah.
He's just and then what?
Well, all of these like AAA battery, like 500 AAA batteries fell out because this whole thing just runs on 500 AAAs. I don't know. That was a stupid joke I came up. I don't even know. Forget that. I'm sorry. But he was actually with Epstein.
Well, he got
was watching. I'm sure, I don't think
he got submarined into Epstein Island. So he went, and I don't know. I did an animation.
That was one of you actually made me cry with that literally made me cry laughing.
Which one?
The one with him in Eyes Wide Shut garb.
Oh yeah. Let me actually have this. I'll see if I can get it.
Can you put
on
it
the
up?
screen?
This made me cry.
Tell you about my vacation. I took a plane called Lolita Express to a private island owned by a man named Jeffrey. I had such a good time and some drinks and liked some entertainment too, followed by some tasty snacks. I would very much like to go back because he put such a good time. Shit was lit.
Yeah, so that's some like footage that showed up later that I got a hold of.
By the way, y'all, if you want to see more of that hilarious satirical imagery from Jimbob, you can go to his IG, his Instagram, and his website is linked. Multiverse. One way that's easy to refute this multiverse nonsense is that, just as we were showing before with like language, assuming a lot of principles of epistemology, predication. So all of these scientific theorist people and they're more like science fiction writers is actually what they are. They don't realize, as we said, that they're using a lot of assumptions and principles, objective truths, just to make sentences. So one thing that we do when we do philosophy, Aristotle pioneered this idea of like the law of identity. And in logic, it's just A equals A, right? That's an assumption, a logical assumption that for a thing to be identified or picked out or spoken of or explained or perceived or whatever to have meaning, it must have identity. It must be able to be picked out amongst all of these other things. So whatever that thing's essence is or whatever we're doing, it has some identity. It has some particular feature that makes it a one singular unified particular, a thing, that thing, as opposed to things, that thing, right? So that law of identity is obviously necessary for any kind of meaningful predication. For me to talk to Jimbob, I have to be picking out that dude right there, not every single Jimbob in the world, right? Not every single dude. So law of identity is obviously fundamental to reasoning in this world, to basic predication, to knowledge, right? I know that fact, right? That fact is that fact because of the law of identity. Now, in really abstract philosophy and meta level questions, it's not always going to hold in this real easy, simple way. But for most of the time in normative philosophical discourse, argumentation, epistemology, the law of identity holds. And again, that thing must be that thing to talk about that thing. Right? So it's a logical assumption that's really simple. Now, we as humans are a little more complex because, you know, it's a little bit more difficult to define what a human is, or what Jay is, or what Jimbob is, or who that person is, right? That's a little more difficult, a little more metaphysical, but regardless, even still, law of identity applies to all of us too, right? I mean, Jay has to be Jay to be explained or known as Jay. I can't also at the same time be Jimbob. That's impossible for the created world, for us to reason and make sense of it. I can't at the same time be not me. Jay is not Jay. That's nonsense statement, right? Jay is popcorn. That's nonsense, right? So there's some static feature, something that is in stasis, that's perpetually true, a law of identity, a continuing feature of my existence that doesn't change. I might grow gray hair. It might all fall out. I might, have a lot of soy and grow some big old titties. I mean, those things might happen, but I'm still, in some sense, the core me, right? I mean, I got beautiful titties now, but I might grow some big ones, right? Same for you. I mean, I haven't seen your titties, but they're probably.
I've got dad tits now, so okay, it's like they grew a little bit from holding the baby a lot, and that's just a normal reaction. But I'm keeping them at a good size.
So we could say that so we'll put the law of identity there, but there's also other features that have occurred in time and space in this world that kind of also go into making us who we are. They might not be essential characteristics, but we could say that in a way they're kind of secondary necessary qualities. For example, the only me that's me is the one that was born in Paris, Tennessee, right? I mean, I'm from Tennessee. That's where I was born. That has to be, that's in a way, a kind of secondary necessity about who I am. There's not going to be a Jay that is me that wasn't also born there, you see. So even historical features of our life, this is an argument that Leibniz proposed. They're not strictly necessary in terms of our essence per se, but once they've come to pass, they kind of have a secondary necessity to us in that that's not going to change. You're not going to be the Jimbob who was born on Epstein Island, right? You're not going to be that dude tomorrow. So when we think about it in that way, that's who we are, at least to this point in time. And it would be absurd to start doubting those things, right? Like you could say, well, I don't believe that the past ever occurred. Well, okay, but that's going to lead you into absurdities to say that if you want to go that route. But since we don't go that route, then those are all in a way related to our identities and who we are. So if we're going to even talk about me, to posit that there's also a me in a universe that's all butts and farts, not only is that absurd, but that's not me, because that's violating the law of identity. Because by definition, me is this me. I have no basis, no knowledge, no way to even posit the possibility of a me that's not this world me, that's also over there in fart dimension. It's utterly nonsense. But in order to argue about that other dimension, I'm still assuming regularity and the properties of identity in this world. That's why it doesn't work.
Right. And then even if you somehow acquired even a blip or a taste of that other universe, like I said at the beginning, it would now be in this universe. Like, how could you separate it if you obtained it? if you got to it, if you reached in, like Stranger Things through the weird vaginal hole in the wall, it's now a part of this universe in a way. Like, so even dimensions, that theory is like, if you ever got to the point where you proved it, you'd only be showing more of this reality, more of this universe.
Exactly. Right. I mean, there's an assumption that, let's say I have a DMT trip, or let's say that Christianity is true and I have a vision of the spirit realm, like some of the prophets, like Ezekiel did, or something like that. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that's true. That doesn't necessitate that it's an infinite multiverse of all potentialities. That's a non sequitur. I mean, that could just be higher dimensions of this universe. Exactly. So, but again, keep in mind the people that are believing this are total, like, just bugmen type people. They don't even think about the absurdities of it. They're just loving the oh, we live in a multiverse. Like, God doesn't exist. That's all absurd. But there are infinite realities where I can go be a god, right? And there's some reality where I'm a god. Basically, I'm lording over my, and I can turn you all to cheese by touching you, and haha, you're cheese now. And you just fall onto the ground into a big puff, right? I mean, that's like the ultimate kind of soy fantasy, right? That's why that appeals to that type of person, and it has. What is the empirical basis for that? Nothing. I mean, all of these people are science-obsessed empiricists. There's no empirical evidence for that nonsense. Dreams? Really? Well, again, I mean, if that's the case, then all absurdities are also real. If all absurdities are real, then there is no logic, there is no consistency, because how do we know that the logic and rationality that we possess in this world is actually the real one, or the logical, consistent one? Maybe there's maybe in the fart dimension that's actually more logical, or the real one. Right. I mean, it's just it all reduces to absurdity. Right.
Exactly. You'd have to who could argue the one reality is the true one to measure to? I mean, you just couldn't. It would just never end.
And by the way, I have Lisa Randall's books. I have Brian Greene's book where I know what the arguments are, and they're like, oh, well, if we think about infinite space and the fact that it's going on forever and ever, which, by the way, is not an empirical proof. That's just an assumption, because you can't empirically prove infinity going off in that direction or any direction. That's just an assumption. Because you don't empirically see something infinite, right? You're assuming that it is. Light goes in that direction forever. How do you know that? You don't know that. Maybe it appears to, but it doesn't really, right? The argument is just that, well, if we think about it continuing to go, then it stands to reason that at some point you would hit another universe. And if you would hit another universe, it stands to reason that that universe might have all the characteristics of this universe, and therefore it could also be infinite. So the argument is just that if things continue in all infinity, in all directions, for all infinite reality, then all potentialities must therefore become actualities. That's the absurdity of this.
Right. So there's
what is the basis for this? Their mind. So they make their mind the God mind. This is the source of logos for them, because remember, there's no logos out there in the world. The world doesn't actually possess that feature. It's only in here, in man's mind. But man's mind is not actually a logos. It's just chemical reactions. There's no basis to believe. They just and they'll say, well, let's act as if it is. Yes, we know it's just chemical reaction. We can't prove there's consciousness. Let's just act as if. Let's play.
That's funny. That's funny, because the starting point doesn't even affirm that this reality is even believable to even start the exploration into other universes. You're already starting from a broken place where nothing can be known to be true, which, even though that's completely absurd, I'm not surprised that they can extrapolate. If nothing is true, then anything can be true in a weird, funny, dumb way. Why can't it be this? Why can't all the books behind J be also, little J Dyers, and they have a being? We just can't access them, man. And they all found you because you are them, and they glowed a little bit before you bought them, and like whatever. It's like where nothing is true, then anything can be a proposed sort of reality, because there's no constraint. But it's so dumb because you are left appealing to language needing to have meaning. The words need to have meaning to make the claim of a metaverse, the numbers, the logical,
Yeah,
the
I need
phrasing,
universals, I need particulars, I need all those things.
Yeah, everything you said. Yeah, you have to be you to even, talk about it. So yeah, then there's the not so, like you were mentioning the typical like bong smoking stoners who they're not really invested in it. They're just kind of like it's fun. But then there's like, right now there's, the theorists who are, writing their novels and coming up with the next big theory of all of it. And it always leans toward those theories.
Yes.
Where
So
inaccessible truth
right
is the leading proposition, basically.
So how do I refute multiverse theory? By this. This is what the multiverse dude is doing. I use the law of identity to deny identity. That's the refutation. Right. It's that easy. That's simple. You ready for super chats, or do you want to go in another direction?
No, that's good.
Okay. All right, we got Home Mad ET Error. I'm not going to read his name because that's a violation name. He sends $5. Thank you. Tall City 03, $5. What's up, dude? Tall City. Well, we know that I'm not going to make a short joke. Hurt people's feelings. Don, $100. He says, keep up the good work, brother. Well, I will keep up the good work as long as you send me $100, dude. That's going to feed me for an hour. John, $3. He says, if there was no Satan, but man is still fallen, for us, the whole narrative stands or falls together, so it wouldn't really make sense to speak of man falling without the temptation of Satan. But he says, do you think that the world would look the same as it is today? Yeah, I just think that's an impossible question. That's like, what if, God created a world where there weren't humans? What would it be like? I don't know. Marco, $10. Have you ever heard of the mathematicians that deny the existence of infinity? Yes. It makes sense from a materialistic worldview. Too bad materialism itself is flawed. Yeah, at a certain point, those people are kind of just talking in circles, and they're using words and then turning around and saying, well, but we don't actually, there's potentially an infinite number of numbers, but they're also not really infinite. Or we can divide the number one infinite number of times, but infinity is not actually a real thing. Okay, well, but all of these other scientism proponents propose that the universe is infinite. So now it's not. You see, it's just constant, like, it's just people making shit up, dude. That's what it is. It's that simple. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
There's a great quote of, we need to find this quote. It was somewhere on YouTube, but it's William Shatner, and he was talking about hanging out with like NASA people, and then he saw the, supposed NASA stuff. He went and toured it, like the ships and whatnot. Then he met with all these NASA people and heard a bunch of their lectures, and he said, my God, I realized it's all just theory, right? He literally says it's science fiction.
That's not a theory. Just look at that real footage.
But William Shatner says, think about it. He's Captain Kirk, and he's working with all these science fiction writers. He meets all these science guys, and he says, it's at a convention, actually. If you find the video on YouTube, it's him at a convention being interviewed. And he says, I realized the scientists at NASA are no different than the science fiction writers that work on the show, because they're just making shit up.
Yep.
Annoying questions, $3. Why do you need incoherent models to compare your model to justify your model? I don't need them, but there are incoherent models, and so it's kind of just an unavoidable thing. That's like saying, why do you need a bad argument to compare to a good argument? There are bad arguments. So how else are you going to compare bad arguments other than comparing them to good arguments? That's kind of like unavoidable, bro. But I appreciate that $3. You're banning your urban moving systems. You're banning movies. You're banning 678. YouTube demonetize you? Yes. I love your essential hero video response to Mr. Guttermain Hyde. I watched it so many times like a spurg. Yes. Sam liked it too. I sent it to him. He got a kick out of it. Thank you for that. Shawsby13, $5. Do you think atheists are, by the way, I'm not trying to leave you out, Jimbob, if you want to say anything to these super chats. Do you think atheists are hesitant to try to justify their presuppositions out of bad faith? Yeah, often. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also out of like, I think there's a level I remember just not too long ago. I mean, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I was pretty staunch atheist, and there was a shame factor of like not shame, like you don't want to go out on a ledge where you look silly or you start, playing with ideas that you cannot base in material because your whole crew is all like, yeah, science, man, and so you don't want to explore these things. So there's a little bit of like the same phenomenon of wearing a face mask, it's like, but that's why I think the conversations are for those people who are in that place and they do want to explore truth and be challenged. They exist, but like Jay said, like casting the net, it's going to be a lower percentage yield.
Yeah.
But it'll really make a difference for the people that are interested, and they won't know to be interested unless you're also having the conversation and talking. Just like myself, I was interested and I found the right people, and I approached them, I went on Jay's show. I went on Owen's show. I was prodded, you know what I mean? So, I mean, I guess you're right, but also don't discard them. Don't just embarrass an atheist.
Yeah, that's good points. Penny Roo, $5. Thank you for this conversation. I'm really loving it. I love you, Jimbob. Penny Roo.
Thanks, Penny Roo.
Dan Man, $5. What do you think about the prophecies of St. Pius, Cosmos, the Elder Joseph on Hagia Sophia recapturing Constantinople? Yeah, I mean, I've seen these for a decade. I'm not totally discounting them, but sometimes these things are made up. Sometimes they're forgeries. Sometimes they're used for geopolitical motivations. I don't really have any opinion on them, so I hope I didn't hurt your feelings there, but I'm more interested in what I can argue and confirm, from scripture, that kind of stuff. But I'm not discounting that there can be real clairvoyance. Absolutely. Lone Star, $20. I appreciate y'all's work. I can literally feel my brain expanding, making new connections every time I watch y'all's stuff. Thank you very much. And yeah, Jimbob is also very based and good at. I see him in the comments, man. He just kind of dissects these people like a surgeon, dude. He's like just cutting them up, baby. He's like a ninja with arguments. He's getting really good at debate. Rusty Shackelford, $50. The way that you two guys chat, by the way, that's a fat super chat. Thank you, Rusty. The way you two chat seems to make philosophical terms easier for my low IQ self. Don't talk about yourself like that, Rusty. Thank you and God bless. Well, glad that we can make these things accessible. That's kind of the point.
That's also why I really enjoy coming on, because I'm a novice still, logic, philosophy, theism, and a part of my back and forth with Jay, it actually forces him out of the higher level terminology, because that he's used to debating with people or talking, because it's just like an established level of words, definitions, and things like that. And it's helpful. It's helpful for him to Jay, for you to dumb it down for someone who's at my level, because there's a lot more people at my level than at your level. And so, I mean, even when you went on what's his name, he was even lost on some terms. Stefan, he was just like, educate me. I haven't heard of any of these things, So that just shows like there's a pool of people who are really interested in this stuff, but there has to be an accessible layer to it,
Right. Thanks, man. Appreciate that. That's kind words. anybody interested in what we talked about tonight, I highly recommend Dr. Jason Lyle's little book, Ultimate Proof. It's a really good introduction to the topics that we have been discussing at an accessible level. It's not written for the technical philosopher person. It's written at a pretty accessible level. Dan Man, $3 again. He says, do you know about electric universe theory? Yes, I do. I've watched many of those videos 8 years ago when they first proposed it. I followed it for a while, listened to the podcast for a while. I'm not saying it's all, I don't know. I love to hear different theories. It would be very cool if electric universe theory was correct. It sounds pretty, I don't know, like, I mean, lightning and shit. That's just cool, right? I don't know. But Jimbob, do you have any opinion on that?
I probably only watched like one video, probably not the person you're talking about, but I mean, like you said, it sounds cool. It's hard to like really understand it because you're actually taking terms and paradigms that are in the physical, natural physical, and trying to create a model out there that we can't access. And it kind of forces you to explain, how you were saying the things, like the Bonson thing. I was just watching your review of the Bonson debate or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Stein or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And like that key point where the things that to be true aren't accessed or debated or proven the same way, and so electric sounds like it still doesn't account for the immaterial absolutes we deal with. Necessarily.
Crackers in the pantry fallacy is what
not that it claims to. It's just that my interest is where the material intersects with the mind and the preconditions for what we're doing, thinking, talking. But it sounds cool. It sounds like something I could listen to. I mean, I have a lot of time. What is that the name of the YouTube? The Electric Universe? Is that the actual name of it?
I think that is their channel. I forget the dude's name.
I'll look it up.
But anyway, also recommended too if you're new to these topics and you want to kind of get into the mindset. I recommend the Quadrivium book. It's really good. It kind of ties a lot of these seemingly disparate areas of the relationship between math and numbers in the world together. So anyway, everybody be sure and go follow Jimbob at his sites and his. Here's
another really insanely
I have
complex philosophical book, Savage Memes Volume 2, with the Karunka.
And that means Randy
capsule.
Savage memes. Literally every meme is Randy
That's
Savage.
That's right. Made by Jimbob.com.
All right, y'all. Thank you very much. God bless everybody. Have a good night. And by the way, I have for those that are wondering, I'm halfway through Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum book, so that will be the next book. Probably do it maybe tomorrow. So I've been eager to do the head of Davos's book because guess what? He lays it all out. So I'm gonna lay it all out for y'all in the next stream. Thank you, Jimbob.
Thank you. Thanks everybody.
It's a pleasure.
See ya.